She walked into the store with quiet steps, clutching her worn handbag a little tighter, her eyes scanning the shelves for something special. It was just a small gift, nothing fancy, something to surprise her daughter for her birthday. But the moment she stepped through the polished doors, the air seemed to shift. Two shop assistants gave her a long look, then whispered behind the counter. The way they sneered, it was as if she didn't belong there. Dressed in a plain sweater and scuffed shoes, she didn't fit the usual picture of their high-end clientele. But she wasn't there to impress anyone. She was there for love. Every item she touched was met with rolled eyes or patronizing smiles. "Can you afford that?" one of them said under her breath, loud enough to be heard. The woman didn't respond. Her heart pounded, not from shame, but from the deep hurt of being judged by people who didn't know her story. What they couldn't see was the strength behind her silence, the long hours she worked, the sacrifices she made. They didn't know that this simple woman was anything but weak, and they certainly didn't know who her husband was. Just as the laughter grew louder and the insults bolder, the front doors swung open again. A man stepped in, tall, sharply dressed, with an expression that silenced the room. One look at his wife's face, and he knew everything. The assistants froze. He walked up calm but cold, and what he said next, it changed everything. But we'll get to that. First, let's rewind and see how this woman got here, and why she refused to give up, even when the world tried to humiliate her. Her name was Lena. She never cared much for appearances or flashy things. A warm smile, a clean home, and her family's happiness, that was enough for her. She grew up in a small town where kindness meant more than money, and no one judged you by the brand of your shoes. But moving to the city changed that. Here, everything was faster, louder, colder. Lena had married young, and most people had no idea who her husband really was. To them, he was just a quiet man who drove an old car and wore simple clothes. But behind closed doors, he was the head of a powerful company, one of the country's youngest billionaires. He didn't show off his wealth, and neither did Lena. They preferred to live quietly, focusing on what mattered most, each other. Still, some things hurt more than she let on. The way people looked down on her, assuming she didn't belong, like she was invisible, unless someone richer walked in behind her. Today was supposed to be simple. She wanted to pick out a bracelet her daughter had seen in the window last week. Lena had saved for weeks, setting aside small bills from the grocery money, all for this one surprise. But now, standing in that store, surrounded by judgmental stares and mocking words, the joy had been stolen from the moment. The assistants didn't even try to hide their smirks. "This section might be out of your range," one said, motioning her toward a dusty corner shelf. Lena swallowed her pride, determined not to cause a scene. But deep down, something cracked. She reached for her phone, not to call her husband, but to double-check the price. What she didn't know was that he was already on his way. Lena's fingers hovered over the screen, heart thudding as she checked the price again. It was just within reach, she had enough. But as she moved toward the counter, the taller assistant stepped in front of her. "We don't hold unpaid items," she said sharply, her tone slicing through the air. "Customers like you usually change their minds anyway." Lena blinked, stunned for a moment. Not by the words, they weren't new, but by how easily they were said. Around her, the store buzzed with quiet laughter. A young couple nearby looked over, the woman whispering something to her partner while eyeing Lena's clothes. What they didn't know was that Lena had been through worse. She had faced days when she wasn't sure how to feed her family. She had walked miles to clean other people's homes so her children could wear shoes to school. Humiliation wasn't new to her. But somehow, this felt heavier. Meanwhile, in a car just minutes away, Daniel, her husband, was getting an alert on his phone. It was the store's location. Lena had left it on accidentally, a small GPS detail they used to keep each other safe in the city. He smiled softly, thinking of her, then paused. Why had she been there this long? Back in the store, Lena took a deep breath. "I'll take it," she said quietly, placing the bracelet on the counter. The assistant rolled her eyes, loudly sighing. "Sure, but we'll need payment up front." Behind the counter, the other employee muttered, "She probably just wants to take a picture for social media," and walk out. Lena's hands trembled as she reached into her purse. What no one expected was that someone had just walked through the door, and everything was about to shift. The door opened with a quiet chime, but no one turned to look. The assistants were too busy snickering, one nudging the other as Lena slowly pulled out a folded stack of cash, neatly counted, saved coin by coin. She placed it gently on the counter, her hands steady despite the burning in her chest. "Cash," the taller one said with a sneer. Of course, she picked up the bills with 2 fingers like they were dirty. "We'll have to verify these. Could be fake for all we know." Lena stayed silent, her eyes fixed on the bracelet. She hadn't come for their approval. But even now, after all her struggles, being treated like this hurt more than she wanted to admit. She told herself to breathe, to stay calm, but the sting of disrespect was sharp. Across the store, a man had stopped just past the entrance. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on her, his wife, standing small beneath the weight of judgment. Daniel didn't speak. Not yet. He took it all in, the assistant rolling her eyes, the way the other one looked Lena up and down, and the bracelet she was still trying to buy. He moved slowly, deliberately. Customers started noticing him now, some recognizing his face from magazines or business news. A whisper spread. The atmosphere changed, but the assistants were too caught up in their cruelty to realize who had arrived. "I don't think she can afford that," one muttered. Lena flinched, just slightly, and that was enough. Daniel stepped forward. His voice, calm but firm, echoed across the store. "Is there a problem here?" Everything stopped. Heads turned. The assistants froze mid-sentence. Lena looked up, eyes meeting his. She hadn't called him, but he was here. For a long second, no one moved. Daniel's question hung in the air like a warning. His eyes locked on the assistant who still held the bracelet. She blinked, suddenly unsure. No, sir. Everything's fine," she stammered, trying to regain control. But it was too late. The calm in Daniel's voice didn't hide the storm behind his eyes. Lena opened her mouth to speak, but he raised his hand gently, not to silence her, but to say "I've got this asterisk. Actually," he continued, turning to the cashier, "I'd like to speak to the manager." The assistant fumbled. "She's not in today." "She's here," he interrupted, pulling out his phone and making a call. Within moments, a sharply dressed woman emerged from a back office, confusion turning to panic the moment she saw him. "Mr. Gray," she said breathlessly, "I wasn't aware you'd be." "Clearly," Daniel said. He turned slightly, motioning to his wife. "My wife came here to buy a gift. What she received instead was humiliation." Before the manager could speak, another voice chimed in, one that hadn't been heard before. "He's exaggerating," the assistant said, arms crossed. "We treat all customers the same." Daniel looked at her, eyes narrowing. "Is that so?" The room had gone dead quiet, but then an unexpected sound broke the tension. A voice from behind the crowd, recording everything on her phone. "Actually," the woman said, "I've got the whole thing on video," from when she walked in. Gasps echoed. Even Lena looked surprised. She didn't know anyone had been watching. The assistant turned pale. But the twist wasn't over yet, because just as Daniel took the phone to view the footage, another man entered the store, and this man wasn't just another customer. He was someone Daniel knew, someone he hadn't seen in years. The store went silent as the man stepped forward. His suit was just as sharp as Daniel's, but his smirk carried something colder, familiar yet unwelcome. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Ethan," he said flatly. "Didn't expect to find you here," Ethan replied, casually glancing around. "Still playing the noble billionaire." His gaze landed on Lena, then shifted to the assistants, sensing the tension. Looks like I walked in at the perfect time. Lena looked between them, confused. She had heard of Ethan before, Daniel's former business partner, the one who tried to take control of the company years ago and failed. They hadn't spoken since. Ethan turned to the manager. "I have an ownership stake in this location," he said smoothly. "Maybe we don't need to make a scene. Let's just give the lady her bracelet and move on." But Daniel didn't back down. "You may have paperwork," he said, "but I have full controlling interest. And no one, no matter who they know, treats my wife like this." He looked at the staff, then the manager. "Both of them," he said, pointing to the assistants, "are done. Effective immediately. And you," he added, facing the manager, "will send a formal apology to my wife in writing. Today." The assistants gasped. One tried to speak, but the crowd, now watching every second, was already filming. Lena stood quietly, bracelet in hand, stunned by how quickly things had turned. Daniel reached for her hand and smiled gently. "Let's go home." As they walked out, Ethan called out, "You always had a flair for drama." Daniel paused at the door. "And you always underestimated people." They stepped outside into the sunlight, but just as the door closed behind them, Lena's phone buzzed with a message. She glanced at the screen, her eyes widened. It was from Ethan. And it said, "We're not done yet." Lena stared at the message, her fingers gripping the phone just a little tighter. She didn't say anything at first. Daniel noticed and looked down at her, concerned. She simply turned the screen toward him. He read it, sighed, and shook his head. "He's bluffing," he said gently. "He always did like games." Still, as they got into the car, a quiet worry lingered in the air. But Lena, looking out the window, wasn't thinking about Ethan anymore. She was thinking about how easily people judge based on appearances, how quickly kindness is replaced by cruelty when someone doesn't look the part. The bracelet now sat in her lap, still wrapped in tissue paper. Her daughter would be thrilled. That was what mattered. Back at home, Daniel made a few calls. The manager was replaced within the week. The assistants never returned. And the video of the incident, it went viral, not because of who Daniel was, but because of how Lena had been treated. People resonated with it. Stories poured in from others who had felt invisible, humiliated, pushed aside. For Lena, it was never about revenge. It was about dignity. About showing her daughter that you don't have to scream to be strong. Sometimes, just standing your ground is enough. Ethan never followed through on his threat. Maybe he realized Daniel wasn't one to push. Or maybe he saw that power isn't always loud. Weeks later, on her daughter's birthday, Lena handed her the little box. Her daughter opened it slowly, eyes lighting up. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Lena smiled, brushing her daughter's hair back. "You're worth every bit of it." And in that quiet room, surrounded by love, Lena knew she never needed to prove her worth to anyone. She always had it.